Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measure podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, gentlemen.
It is another good day. This week has been zooming by for me. Seems like it's going pretty quick here. Our main topic today is probably going to be a bit of a bore for most people. So this is going to be
Wow.
Well, I'm gonna do this purely based off your reaction, Tommy, to the topic that I presented here. So Tommy was like, "Oh man, what's going on?" Like,
oh yeah.
I mean, Tom, you push back a little bit, right?
Speak for the people.
All right, speak for the people. I want to speak for all of us collectively because that's what Tommy does for us. So I'll do it for everyone else on the podcast. So just kidding. The main topic for today is kind of reviewing the Microsoft security white paper. I know people love security, but as organizations adopt Power BI, this is a very common question, conversation, occurrence, and a lot of people I'm very encouraged that Microsoft has taken a very a good stance on, hey, look, there's a lot of security things that are happening in Power BI. Here's a white paper that kind of consolidates all of them together. Here's a single thing you should read. So there is a link here in the description on this video of the actual security white paper, like the page, where you can go download the PDF. It's quite long. Don't worry, we're not going to go through every little fine grained detail. It's kind of more of like our key observations or main things or points around the security white paper.
We're not. I thought this entire episode was just going to be me reading the white paper.
Yes, thanks. That could we would need a couple episodes for that one.
Yeah, maybe I should just do some side episodes where, if you haven't read the white paper, you can go to sleep to Seth's
security story time.
Phase 3 recovery plan.
Well, let's be real too.
While Fabric ensures that the data remains accessible.
Can we publish this on Amazon for like?
You can also ask to fully restore their services to the state before the incident. The section.
Let's be real, Mike. How many people
would you listen, audience? Would you listen to that?
About VNets, right? How many people get jazzed about VNets? And
no
one, right? So yeah, there's a conversation here. Like, okay, no one is excited to do this, but this is so integral to what we do.
It's important.
I haven't seen excitement. I've seen massive frustration from people who do actually understand a good chunk of it, talking to people who don't.
Yes,
those are fun conversations.
Yes.
No, that's not how it works. No, you don't understand. No, we can't do that. This is how it works.
And this is a lot of these conversations that I hear around security are kind of, you don't know a couple things. Well, we'll get into that a little bit. I think this is where I think the conversation will be interesting today, just because there's just so much that needs to be talked about, I think, in the security space. I think there's a lot of opportunity here for us to continue to invest in this and learn more about it, and want to make sure people have the tools and the equipment, like, they know where to go to find this information. I think it's important. Anyways, that being said, let's do a couple intros, some news, if you will. So a lot of things been happening. Tommy, you were just mentioning, man, there's like so many blogs coming out recently and so many new things happening. I would agree. It feels like after build, there's been a wave of just net new developments or things just getting out the door. Tommy, what did you find recently?
So one of the things I'm actually personally excited about for some of the clients, and actually myself too, is on-premise data, or bringing your on-premise data into the One Lake experience, which really is pretty important. And you have a lot of organizations and a lot of systems still that are still dealing with on-premise data. They haven't necessarily moved to the cloud, and guess what? That's okay. Not everything needs to be in the cloud. And speaking of security, there's a lot of reasons also organizations want security. So this is actually something that came out near the end of May, actually May 23rd, which I can't believe we're already in June, but just talking about the experience, what it's like to bring your on-premise data into One Lake, what that experience is like. I believe you can mirror now, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And which is really, I mean, again, to me, that's significant. That's pretty significant because you're still having a lot of data that's still on premise.
So mirroring is an interesting feature that Microsoft has been kind of promoting here for a bit. And I've been very vocal about, like, there's a lot of common patterns in data engineering, especially when you're trying to get data from a source system into some sort of lake experience. It's very common. You have tables that need to be updated. They need to be as close as they can to what's in the original system. That's what you're trying to get to. And depending on what that data does in the original system, how much you can trust the different date fields in it, kind of determines what kind of architecture you build or how much data you need to bring in. So, really think mirroring is very interesting because they're listening to the change data, CDC change data,
Change data capture.
Yeah.
change data capture. Sorry, I would say catalog. Change data capture, which is listening to the tables. And so, I believe even if you look at the change data capture experience in mirroring, Microsoft's actually doing some of this for free for you. They're giving you some free storage that will allow you to use mirroring without actually having to pay for your own storage for that. So that's actually another advantage to try and get you into mirroring, because Microsoft is going to just do it for free to a degree. It's not going to be like unlimited free, but there's a portion of it that you can just use, which I think is really helpful. And Tommy, to be clear about these on-prem sources, the on-prem OneLake sources are, it's starting with this thing called an S3 bucket, right?
Yeah.
So as long as the format is an S3, you're going to be able to make shortcuts to data that lives on-prem, but is in the S3 format. So if you have storage of files, or you can have a S3 storage compatible system, that's where you can go get these shortcuts from. So again, there's a lot of this story around leave the data where it is, don't move it, just connect to it. Which I think
Amazon
is a really relevant
S3
thing.
compatible, or even Google Cloud, which I
Yeah.
guess is on-prem if it's Google Cloud. But
one feature that I noticed here recently, which seems interesting to me, is if I think about like what happens in like a Delta table continually changes itself. It makes new log files, like, that describe the Parquet files that are underneath the hood of that thing, the table. I think there's this interesting thing. There's a feature where they say you can cache the data. So you can connect to a source and you can turn on caching. So it will keep a copy of the data inside your OneLake, but it's like a hot cache. Like, so if you are refreshing a data set, 3 or 4 or 5 times a day, and nothing is changing on the actual data set side, it will just read from the cache directly from Azure. So it won't cost you more money to go back to the original source and get the data. So that's another interesting feature that I thought, I like the idea of that. That makes a lot of sense. That you can intelligently look at these Delta tables, see if they've changed. If they haven't, then just use the cache instead. So it really cuts down the need to go cross cloud when you're accessing data, which could get, I think, kind of expensive if you're refreshing things very frequently. Cool. The only other one I had here that was relevant here is I have a post from Zoe Douglas from LinkedIn. And what Zoe is doing is Zoe is explaining there's a couple new features that have just been announced. This is from the blog, but she does a quick little video on the Model Explorer. So inside desktop, you have this Model Explorer window where you have the measures, the calculations, the columns. It's a little bit of a different format, but in there, you're able to make calculation groups. So it's an editing feature where you can make calculations groups inside this model window. And apparently that's now gone GA both in desktop and in the service. So that's kind of a big moment there for the modeling tab, or modeling pane, I guess it would be called. But now that's both in both places, and it's now under generally available, which is also a very interesting and exciting thing as well. I'll put that link here in the description for anyone who wants to go see her little mini video on it, and also wants to check it out.
And that modeling view is more than just calculation groups. It's really all of the metadata that was previously only available in Tabular Editor, or a feature like that, or an external tool like Tabular Editor. Being able to see the measures, the percent, I think the relationships, the roles, being able to see the perspectives, and now that's all available to be seen. Interestingly enough, came out first in desktop, correct? I think this was actually only available desktop, and then the web. Usually it's the other way around, where they come out with a feature in web, then it becomes in desktop. But yeah, the fact that they're GA, I think for a lot of people, Tablet Editor is still something intimidating. I think for maybe more the general public, I would say. I'm doing a training course now, actually, Mike, on Tablet Editor 3. And for a lot of people, like, the UI is the biggest hurdle for a lot of people.
It's a technical tool. It's got a
Yeah,
lot
it
of things in
definitely
it.
is. Right. So the fact that you have the same user experience in Power BI, but some really important information here, and I hope they do more with perspectives. That's something I'll put to the parking lot for another day. But the fact that they now have that in desktop is now GA is pretty important. The
It's
web
probably,
thing,
it's probably somewhere. Perspectives is probably somewhere in the security paper. I would also imagine as well.
I'm sure. Well, no, because the only way we use perspectives right now is for personalized visuals, from a Power BI point of view.
We'll have to dig into the security paper and look for it.
Or I can use Control F and find that
Or
really
you
quick.
can use that and try and find it. That's what I meant by that comment. Oh, Tommy, where were you going? You're going with an
Yeah,
somewhere
no,
with your comment.
I'm curious though, Mike. The fact that it's in the web, and this has been your big thing, is everything available in the web from a Power BI point of view. Are you going to be using this in the web?
Oh yes, most certainly. I mean,
Okay.
especially if I'm already using a lot of experiences in the web already. The modeling experience is good in the web, I believe. I mean, I feel like it's fairly substantial. You can make the measures and the relationships you want. It feels very similar to what desktop's doing. I think my guess here is they're trying to really provide parity between everything in desktop, everything on web. I mean, it's going to be there. So, I mean, if you're asking me, all those, and this is where I think things are not necessarily always a great fit, right? If you are a company that has a lot of Mac users in it, right? You're probably not a Microsoft shop company in general. You don't have Microsoft Office. You're probably not using Microsoft products. You're probably using Google or some other tool for all your business need elements. I really think there's a two-horse race going on here. It's either you're Microsoft or you're Google. That's the only thing I see anymore in businesses. So for those companies who want to use Power BI, Google doesn't really have a great, they have Looker, but they don't really have a great experience of like this full-fledged enterprise BI corporate solution that is Power BI and Fabric. I don't see it. Maybe it's there, but it's not this kind of comprehensive all-in-one package that I'm seeing Microsoft produce here. So I don't know. There's always been this argument of like, well, now it's on the web and now you can have Mac users use this. I don't know how relevant that is because I don't think most of those other users in that company are even interested in using Microsoft products. So why pick the one Microsoft product to push everyone into now that you can use it on the web? I'm not quite sold on that story yet. My success has been very different for companies that have.
Honestly, unless you're using
Google.
version control extensively in Power BI, the web doesn't make a ton of sense, right? Because one of the first things I did after my computer, in a sense, reset itself, well, in so many words, was install Power BI desktop, because I have the version control. I have some things in Git, but I also have a lot of things in SharePoint still too. I haven't migrated everything over. As soon as I start using the web for my modeling, well, that's immediately now out of sync with anything I'm doing in desktop. So unless I'm using extensively my modeling and my Power BI semantic models in Git, in Azure DevOps, like maybe there's a quick fix here, but that's not like, oh, good. Well, even if my computer reset, I still have the web to do everything.
I see what you're saying. I see your point here on this one. I don't necessarily think I agree with it. I think the source of truth of where you used to keep things is starting to shift. And what I mean by that is the source of truth was typically SharePoint with a PBIX file that you would upload to. That was kind of like the method for just to make sure your computer doesn't self-destruct itself. This is where you put it so you have a backup. I believe the story of truth is now shifting away from that and now moving more towards a Git experience. So the repo now, yeah, Donald, you're right on point. You're right. You're going right where I'm going with this one. I think the repo is now becoming the source of truth. And this is very common in a lot of other products Microsoft has built. Azure Data Factory and Synapse. They also have this experience of like, hey, I'm live editing something and I'm then connecting it to a repo and I'm keeping copies of all the information that runs that environment in a repo. So I think the repo experience inside Power BI, yeah, there's a couple things that are still missing that don't get tracked inside the Git repos. But in general, I think it's actually a really seamless experience and it's actually pretty easy to use. So I think the source of truth is shifting from SharePoint and single files that are PBIXs. I think we're moving more towards this Git enabled, easy to use experience. And so to your point though, Tommy, like I would assume at some point the web and your desktop would just always point at whatever is in the Git, and
Right.
that should be your source of truth. And so I will no longer download PBIX files from the service to go edit them on desktop. I'll no longer store them in SharePoint and then bring them down, edit them, and then publish them. Now what I'll do is I'll just have everything attached to the Git repo, and that way when I want to edit something in desktop, I'm assuming my desktop is taking a copy of what is in the service, and I'm starting from there. So my feeling is you shouldn't really use your computer, your local machine, as the source of truth for files.
Well, there's nothing you said that I disagree with.
I know. I'm not sure if I don't know. I just didn't feel as you said something around the web's not going to be that premium experience, or that's going to be
No.
I think it's going to be I think as they continue to add features, more and more people will go there, and that will be their editing and building and modeling experience that will happen in the web, especially now that I'm using more notebooks. I don't like the experience of using notebooks locally. I actually like using experiences inside the service. So I'm getting more comfortable with just doing more and more things in the website versus on desktop.
I don't have a specific article, but I guess one of the interesting things that did strike me in looking at like the Power BI blog that I kind of have a question around after the statement. Like there are a lot of products and features that people are confused about a lot and all the time.
Okay.
And one of those is like confusion around GA or things being in preview forever is what I hear a lot of.
True. Yes.
So like one of the things that stands out to me is within the last less than month, right? On May 21st, there's Copilot and Microsoft Fabric is now generally available in the Power BI experience. June 3rd, the general availability of Copilot for Power BI is rolling out starting today. And June 4th, ask Copilot questions against your semantic model. Preview. Like so what I'm driving at here, the question is, would you rather see a play-by-play, like those two things really? One is if Copilot is supposed to be the large language model LLM thing that we can do a bunch of stuff on, do we need to change our thoughts and be like, well, actually, it doesn't support some of these things yet. It only supports these that are now GA. And there's actually a bunch of things that are preview. And we should expect to have a GA product with preview features indefinitely?
Well, I think the confusion is because we have about 17 copilots in the Fabric system right now, maybe about 8 to 12.
I get it.
Right.
But if you're talking semantic models, you're talking Power BI. If you're talking Power BI and GA, you're talking Power BI. If you're talking Power BI and Fabric, you're talking about Power BI. I
think they're going from the engineer point of view. There may be one Power BI that you see, but there's a semantic model copilot in their end from a model that's been trained. There's the Power BI Get Experience copilot. There's the one from looking at your visuals. There's the data flow or the Power Query copilot. To Microsoft engineers, those are 4 separate copilots because there are 4 different trained models.
But to the end user,
I agree with you. Yes.
WTF are we supposed to do to understand?
I think we need a diagram.
And this is where I'm saying, like, this is the umbrella term of Copilot. I think is really biting people because if these are individualized things, then a couple things. One is help a brother out, man. Like if you're gonna say Copilot for report pages is now GA, that makes sense. If you're saying there's Copilot for semantic models and that's a different thing and we've applied it and that's in preview, then that makes sense. But like it's not Copilot brackets feature, right? Or feature Copilot, which is kind of how I read it, knowing how the things work and your explanation, which I agree with. I'm just driving at like the origination of like the news conversations, like so much information, so many blogs, and at what point is it a tipping point of this like contest to get stuff out the door, and or have like a confusing messaging, which is really going to hinder people's adoption, I think, of Fabric because they're not going to understand how it works.
It's like trough of disillusionment. that we've talked about. There's this hype of what Copilot is, but yeah, Seth, I completely agree with you. If you're going to say this Copilot is GA, the normal user's not going to go, well, which Copilot? Which one do they train? They're going to just expect
Copilot. Like right now, they just think Copilot, and that's the thing across all the ecosystem,
which is not the case, right?
But now it appears we're parsing it way down, because I would argue a semantic model is part of Power BI. Like,
interesting. I didn't catch that. I'm not seeing the same thing there from my perspective. So I didn't initially pick up on that, but I do think the message of Copilot has been confusing in general. And I think this is, man, it feels like they're trying. I mean, I get it. There's probably a different something behind the scenes that's doing specific things around the data. So I get why they're probably calling it in preview for this specific feature. I don't think you're going to get away from that, though. I think you're right. I think you're going to have a product that has a lot of preview features on it, and they're looking for, does it get widely adopted? Is it something that will, if it stays in preview? What was it in preview for a really long time? The Azure Maps wasn't there something that was in preview
the Azure Maps? I think it was like 4 years.
Like 4 years in preview or something. Like it was just always in preview.
And
like,
I'm not against like things in preview. Like I guess what I'm bringing up is, we know there are many different teams working on consolidating a bunch of things into Fabric. And if this is just an example of reducing the volume or getting on to the same message, I think there's some area of opportunity there where you can streamline some of this communication to the end users so that people aren't like looking at 10 blogs that all say Copilot and they're all in different states of something. And, like, hey, it is this first. This is how we name Copilot stuff. It's Copilot : feature or something, right?
Like the external conflict between engineers and marketing, right? Because marketing is trying to say we have this.
But the people generating these blogs are close to the engineers. They're the PMs.
Sure, right? But we're trying to say there's one Copilot in Power BI. No,
okay. I'm just saying the messaging is confusing. So when you throw in the message, like all of this stuff into these long laundry lists of blog articles that even nerds like us actually try to keep up with, even from a retrospective thing. Great. I love the tags. Love that I can click on Copilot. Not all of the things are showing up there, which is interesting, right? But at the same time, like, okay, which article do I need to read? What Copilot thing am I talking about? If this is Copilot for Power BI, like, why do I see multiple different articles in different states and different previews?
Kind of going from a security point of view, Seth, I see exactly what you're saying. If you're trying to tell your boss, oh no, Copilot's GA, so we can roll it out.
Except you don't ask it this one thing,
right, or don't go to the model because that's still in preview.
Or don't toggle this one button. Right. You read the.
How much is that going to?
Yeah.
Your IT.
This right. Yes. This is the conversation that happens, and that it's a point of observation. I'm not trying to be uber critical, but I think. I think in some regards, if there's opportunities to consolidate information or slow things down on a cadence to get a message or shoot out multiple updates in the same time frame and or clarify some specifics, it'll help. I mean, there's so much volume of stuff that is just under this Fabric umbrella. That I don't know. It'd be okay to slow it down a little bit. That's my news.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I don't think Microsoft's going to be willing to slow anything down. It's going to be just continue force features. And the team's gotten really large too. So
yeah, I get it. But
I know
the team being large just means lots of different groups of people working on things, and you can tell
Correct.
that by the many different PMs that are posting blogs. Mm-hmm. But remember, who's consuming the blog? Are you paying attention to the end audience and not just producing a feed of feature releases? Because if you're just doing feature releases, just create a feature release page and keep dumping into the same long scrollable thing where I can search something.
Yes.
Yeah. No, and I think this does bode well, I think, from a security point of view, because to your point, nothing's going to deter. There's a lot of organizations who are very conservative in terms of when they're going to release something until they know it's GA and also tested. And if you're trying to push things through and you think it says GA, you're like, great, now I can promote this. And it's not, to your point, because there's 7 other co-pilots that have yet to be tested by Microsoft. Well, you're going to now get to a point where you've not only hindered yourself, but you may have blocked a feature from or delayed a feature for months until your organization tests it, because they're not going to trust you and they're not going to trust the GA's label.
Right. But I think this is why Microsoft does the whole releasing things in GA, because that way you don't have to be feature blocked by another team. I think that's, to me, that's where I'm like, that's why they're doing it, is because they want to be able to like, okay, we got to get stuff out. We want people to start testing it. It's close enough that it could start getting usage. Let's refine the idea of it, and potentially it gets better over time because they're actually refining the experience of whatever that new feature is. It's interesting. Maybe we should release more features on Tips Plus, as in the preview.
Just say GA.
I want a diagram of here's Power BI's Copilot. And then here are all of the feature brand, like all the features that Copilot, it's Copilot.
Yep.
Here's all the features, and you could tell me which ones are in GA, and you could tell me which ones are in preview, and you can tell me which ones are on the roadmap. Then I have one place, and I can say, okay, Copilot's GA org, but here's the features that are enabled or not, instead of scrolling through pages and pages of documentation or a technical doc that says, look at the few things that you can do, and you should expect that work in GA, versus you may encounter some anomalous results, and that's called preview, and that's okay. Anyway, let's move on and talk about
the exciting part.
Are there any other news snippets?
No, not the ones there's probably more out there. For now, I would probably say this is okay.
Okay. After consuming 75 pages of security white paper, gentlemen, initial thoughts.
Well, let me give this Microsoft security a proper introduction, and I'm going to do this as a game show host.
Right.
Yeah,
yes.
Because obviously
game show
host. That's the most exciting thing. So now starting Microsoft security fabric white paper.
It sounds like you're doing like a fight. Yeah. This is like a fight between
Are you ready to?
Yeah. No
security.
No, it'd be like, and who do we have? Today,
is that domains? So, we're dealing with 75 pages of security, going from where the data lives, where the both from a user point of view, how a user can access the data, all the way to domains, workspaces, and our normal tenant administration. Mike, I think you put this perfectly. We're dealing with a white paper that really puts together everything.
Yes. There's so much here.
In one place on anything that has to do with your data, with your users, and where they're accessing that data.
And the reason I bring this up, and one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this white paper when it came out, was I think it's underrated that administrators should, yes, this is not a fun read. Yes, this is probably a long read of things that's going on here, but I think as an administrator, it's very important that you go at least read through it, even skim through it, and just read through the different sections, because I guarantee there are probably pieces of security in this white paper that you're probably not using, or you could be using because your company or organization would like to have that or has policies around this, right? So, as a Power BI expert, there's 2 things I think you need to understand. I think you need to understand what is your current company policy for things, and then where does the security elements, or what knobs you should turn inside Power BI so that the security of Power BI matches what you have a security policy in your company. And I think that's really important, because this stuff all exists to make sure people are comfortable with putting their data inside Microsoft's cloud.
Well, I think even one step ahead or one step forward to what you said, not just if you're an administrator, where I think I'm speaking more for consultant, but even if I'm the Power BI person at my organization, having the access to this and being able to speak to this is pretty important, because you are going to have the conversations, the hard conversations with your IT or your stakeholder on where's our data? Where does it live? Or wait, who has access? Like we have these certain scenarios that we really want to either block or give access. how do I ensure that's the case? You're not going to find a lot of, I say more liberal companies who are like, yeah, wherever the data is, that's fine. It's Power BI, great, release it. So there's a lot in here that I was even surprised that they put in here in terms of like, for example, when does your data actually get removed from your computer or from an app? Like at what point does that occur? At what point is its data processing? Is it on your network or is it living somewhere else? That to us, again, to
this matters to companies.
This matters a ton.
Yeah.
A ton.
So I also liked in here as well. I also liked really well. There's a lot of little diagrams in here, and it's kind of showing you there's some pieces here. And again, I just appreciate the architectural pieces because there's all this. I can see Power BI. I can click on the buttons. I know how it works. But the fact that there's Entra ID is like this major gateway to authenticating who the user is and then what they have access to. There's so much work that's going under the hood there that's doing so much provisioning of. Do you have access to this workspace? Do you have access to these artifacts? Is you a part of a security group? I think to me, it really reinforces the emphasis here of Microsoft is one of the, I don't know, maybe there's other tools out there as well for other companies, but I really feel like the Entra ID or the Active Directory, what it was previously, that's really a good selling factor here for everything that is Power BI. And as Fabric, and when I look at that going back into like, what did we start using? We started using SharePoint Online. Started getting comfortable there. Then we started using Power BI. This is another very online program. These two things, I think there was a very big mental shift for companies to say, these things are working for us. It is easier for us to manage, and it's easier for us to scale to our business needs for these cloud sources. So, when I remember when people would starting to roll out Power BI, they're like, "Wow, we don't want to put our data in the cloud. That's not a good idea." And I was like, "Well, you're using SharePoint Online already." So you already have a lot of data in the cloud, and most of your files are already stored in the cloud in SharePoint Online. Why don't we just use Power BI? Because it's basically the same thing. It's still just cloud. It's still in Microsoft, and you can still use it.
Are you surprised? Oh, go ahead.
No, just some two interesting points. One is, I would recommend that everybody who's listening go check it out, and if the information itself doesn't resonate because it can be dry, go to page 65 and they do a Microsoft Fabric end-to-end scenario where I think a lot of it's just a scenario of like how you set up security within Fabric, but the context of the what and why and the decisions you're making about how to implement something, I think would make a lot of sense for everybody to get it a lot, especially areas that you're not familiar with. So almost, I would say, start there, or at least if you're only going to read part of it, read that part.
And that's the end-to-end scenario building, right? Yes.
Yeah, okay. That's 65 and on. So it's like it's a few pages of, the specific scenario of how you would set up Fabric for this thing, and then that almost drives back like, oh, hey, if you have some like you don't know, there's an interest point, and then you can drive back up in the document. So that was one thing that stood out. And the second was when I got into the Power BI section, it was very familiar.
Yes.
It was not verbatim, but it is like, I guess it made me feel good as well as go, okay, well, yeah, this is probably a conglomeration / merge, right, of all the services into this Fabric document. But it didn't feel disjointed, right? I just recognize, having been the nerd I am and read through deeply the Power BI white paper on security, it is the same, right? So there wasn't like it's good and familiar, I guess was the point there.
What did you think about? So, I mean, the Power BI portion of security was familiar. As you read through things around Fabric now, did that change? So, I'm gonna give you some context, and then maybe ask the question. When Fabric showed up, I think people were very nervous about Fabric and what is happening with my Power BI ecosystem, because now I have all these other artifacts that now are appearing inside my Power BI workspace, right? Oh, I've got lakehouses and pipelines, and I'm overwhelmed. There's all I get it, but I heard someone, I think it was Matthew Roach or someone who was kind of communicating about this. They were like, well, if you think about Fabric, there's your security platform, your security boundaries of what you're able to do or not to do doesn't really change much. The security framework is already established by workspaces, by users, by Entra ID. And now all we're doing is we're just adding to that all these, call them other Azure features that are being rebranded and brought directly into the Power BI and now Fabric ecosystem. Azure Data Factory is now pipelines. You have, streaming analytics, which is now like event hubs showing up inside. So you're bringing all these great tools that have been around for a long time. They're now just getting added to Fabric, and now we have the same security boundary. I felt that was very, for me, it was very comforting. Like, oh, okay, well, I had an aha moment. Was like, well, the security doesn't really change. Nothing's really being different here. We're able to reuse a lot of the existing security boundaries by workspaces, by users, admin, contributor, member, viewers, like all this stuff that exists. I understand. We're now just adding it to everything else, which I thought was very nice.
I'm curious, and I don't know if this struck with you guys as well, the organization of the content, because we're dealing again more than just Power BI. Like the first section of the content is really about the VNets, the network, and the outside of security and domains. Right? It's all about how people are going to get access and how your data is flowing, whether or not you're actually setting up a virtual network, whether or not if you actually allow that access. And I would have assumed that would have been more, call it on the lower end of the spectrum. But to me, that's signifying something to me that this is a really big deal with organizations, but also for Microsoft, understanding where your data is living. And I think I wrote down 3 points that Microsoft's really focusing on. Where's your data at rest, in transit, and when it's getting processed? That could be a real big feature of Microsoft.
That's standard.
That's all the old Power BI. Yeah. I think that them putting that first answers the first biggest question that people have about the cloud. Right? Like that, and to Mike's point, and it's still a topic around companies being nervous about the cloud or not wanting their data up there, and what happens to my data. So like those are the pieces that I think being front and center are, hey, listen, we have this SaaS solution. It works for everybody. If you're open to the cloud and you believe in like the security and performance, et cetera, you get everything, right? But we also have ways in which you can, disconnect Fabric from the public internet. And we have VNets and we have these other, you manage these pieces kind of things. Here are some of the limitations there. You're going to be bound by, specific capacity around this thing that you set up. And, it's going to have, all of these different pieces, but it's available to you to use the product. And I think that you have to lead with that, because those were the first questions, even in Power BI, let alone starting to push your on-prem stuff into the cloud. That's where organizations instantly went, well, I don't want my stuff in the cloud. Does it still work for me? Answer, yes. How does it work? Okay, here. And then like leaning into the explicit, security around those solutions that they require, I think puts you into the next level of, oh, okay, this could work for me. Now, what other security stuff do I need to do?
So riddle me this. And again, if I missed this, that's my bad. But nowhere in the documentation did I find anything that had to do with mirroring. And to me, I thought that would have been a major section of the white paper.
Well, mirroring is just newly released, right? That's something that's just going preview right now.
So it would still, I think, fall into the protocols and ways in which Fabric is communicating with your source data. Like it's just like you're setting up the boundaries by which can you do things within this environment, whether that's at a user level, even connecting. And to Mike's point, Microsoft Entra being part of this, there are so many things your organization can do to ensure you are you outside of just a login, right? That like keep you out of the system completely. But I think I read several, like a bunch of different parts in there, Tommy, that would address what you're talking about.
Security.
Well, what you're talking about related to like the specifics, ways in which you can connect to internal or external data, and mirroring to me would be part of the SaaS solution within within the Fabric ecosystem, because what are we able to mirror on? Isn't it just Azure? I don't think we can mirror on-prem, can we? Or is that something that just came out?
That's the
it's just
preview.
it
That's
just
what
came
just
out.
came out in preview.
So it's like
okay. But what's required? The gateway.
Yes.
Right. So that's part of the documentation of how you explicitly create a connection between these things, and that's part of this documentation already.
Honestly, that's a great point. Without addressing features that are rapidly evolving, you're right. The gateway is a huge part of that, and your second part in terms of the ways you can connect to Fabric as well.
I think one of the largest. Go ahead, Matt.
Go ahead. I was going to say, go ahead. You keep going. Your point's probably better. I'm just going to random add not value on this one.
to circle back to, I think one of the biggest shifts or things that I think this white paper did help me with, although I don't necessarily completely agree with the approach yet, is on page 34, where there's a call out of the levels of security, right? And there's this concept of control level versus data level. And at the data level, it dives into item level security in a workspace, right? Where depending on the roles that we're assigning, depending on the permissions that people have,
so Tom Martin was recently talking about.
You can share content with other people within this ecosystem. And and then you talk about the control level, which is you can or can't do or see certain things.
Yes.
And in my argument, I guess I'm conflicted, because at a data level, does it make sense that everybody plays in the same ecosystem, that everybody sees everything? It does to a degree, but at the same time, I've opened up this ecosystem, and it makes sense that Microsoft would do it this way, because if I want people to use a platform, and albeit we know they're bringing enterprise tools to this platform, you get more people to build more stuff in that platform if they have access to it.
Yes.
So at the data level, you're still only going to see the things that you should within, those particular areas where we're talking about Lakehouse or, pipelines or like the ADF, et cetera, right? I still argue that an admin should be able to have control level plane permissioning for users to just not show them certain aspects, unless we're rolling everything off of Power BI, right? Like, unless pipelines or data flows or all the things that you used to do ETL in the service are now going to become like fabricated. Okay, like the argument is gone, but at the same time, I think without that at the control level plane, I don't have the ability as an organization to say, okay, folks, this is Fabric, but there are some things, there are some tools and access that you now have that could really cost us a lot of money, and or you could do some dumb stuff. And the data level controls, I think, the dumb factor. But like, I how do I train people? Well, like we talk a lot about like training people up and having them take a test, or just to, do you understand the environment that you're working in? Do you know how to navigate it? Do you know what you're doing? Blah blah blah.
This is my point.
Where I think where I think the control level is really useful, because it's like, great, enable Fabric from an ecosystem for this level of user, which is viewer or business user or whatever. Turn off these things, because I want to enable them one by one, as we know people are training, as I can apply groups, etc. And that's the way I think about it. I don't, obviously it's not the way like Microsoft thinks about it, so I don't know if I'm right or wrong. It's just like, I would like that level of control in there.
I want to pick on your thought there just a bit, Seth, because I think I like where you're going with this one. And I just want to clarify something. Like, what you're describing is, I have a workspace. I'm willing to let people play with the Lakehouse and maybe the SQL Analytics endpoint, but I don't want you building a streaming job. Like, I don't want you building to your point, like, I have a Fabric workspace, but inside the context of that workspace, I don't want everyone to get like all the options for all the Fabric workloads. I'm thinking, hey, this is a workspace that's centered around these couple workloads. Like, this is the data engineering workload workspace, and I only want you using, like, I don't want you using data flows Gen 2. I'd want you using pipelines and notebooks. Like, you could set that up beforehand, and then it just kind of operates on that mode because that's the decision the company has made to go that direction. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, and I don't know, like obviously, picking and choosing UI features and saying like, "Hey, you know what? Great, hide that." I know this is a complete pain in the rear, right?
Yeah.
But like, would I still like that thing to be grayed out? Like, if you wanna show everything to everybody, that's fine, but you don't do that in the admin spaces. Like and the odd thing to this is like they're already doing that in certain cases where with Microsoft Entra, I have to go in and activate my Fabric administrator role in order to see some of the capacity metrics and have the clickable things in Power BI. So they can already control like my access to those things, and you're showing and hiding stuff based on my role anyway. So why don't I have that flexibility? And the only thing I can think of is because they want everybody to have access to everything, and then you just data secure it, which I get it. I just want the other stuff too.
Mike, do you have anything else on that? Because that raises a question for me, but I want to see if you wanted to keep hammering this.
No, I do think. I mean, so I'll say it again. I'll say it a number of times. I'm going to sound like a broken record here for a little bit, I think, but I think this is okay. Like to your point, Seth, I think this is great that you're having this conversation. This is also where, there's usually a gap that I observe between what users understand about security and how to do things, and then what you actually get when you like the security can handle more things than what the users know is what I guess I'm trying to say, right? So part of us, so the technology has moved faster than our learning has been able to accommodate our users in the workspaces. And I really like your point, Seth, around, well, this workspace is going to focus on these activities. If we're going to do some sort of streaming activity, maybe that's a separate workspace. Let's do that workload somewhere else where I can control it a bit more, or even provide different licensing around, hey, I'm not going to give you a Fabric production SKU inside our development and test environments because I don't want you taking down at any risk of having production go down. And just because you're playing with a streaming analytics something, I don't want reports not to refresh for my executives. Like there's some design. So the idea is like what I see a lot of the times is people don't necessarily know these options exist. The education's not there yet. And therefore we make decisions with security around workspaces, the different artifacts, the things that show up there in a uninformed way, which has unintended consequences where things start failing. And then you learn and you come back and say, wait a minute, whoops, we need to come back and rethink this. We should be separating these workloads between the urgency or demand of those items. So I think, and this is what I really like about our community, is because people like Tom Martins, people that dive into this stuff at a deep level. We had Chris Webb doing a lot of like deep dives on the technical aspects of like how to get data in, how data flows work, all these different things of the lakehouse. People that go deeper on these topics, this is the kind of knowledge that I think we need to be able to easily put our fingers on and give more real world use cases of when and why I want to use these things in a very easy to consume way. And I don't have the answer for this, but I'm just saying, pushing people through the DP600 test doesn't give you like, well, I was just talking to some people. They said we passed it. I'm like, well, how does the DP600 test impact your daily work inside Power BI? I was like, well, there's some things that I knew, some things I didn't know. I passed it, but there were some like kind of tricky questions. And I said, I don't feel like if I see someone go through DP600, I'm pleased that they've done it. They've definitely done the time. They've researched things. They've learned some things, and they can tick boxes on things. Is that person going to be an expert? And do I feel like I'm going to be comfortable giving them, hey, make me a medallion architecture and you know how to do it?
Enabling everything.
I wouldn't enable everything for that user. So right. I really do think, from organization standpoint, because there's so much to this, you have to have someone who's dedicated to spending time learning the things, as well as you got to know where to find knowledge about this stuff. You got to find companies who've been doing this or working with this or have been able to play with this before, because you don't know what you don't know. And there's potentially other considerations here that you just need to think about. Anyways,
let me tag along exactly what you're saying here. Exactly what you're saying here is I want to tag on that. So there maybe needs to be more than one certification, but I think where the complications and I think a lot of confusion can lie for a lot of organizations without being aware of it is every product or every data plane in here has specific roles with specific features and specific restrictions. It's not universal. If I have a warehouse, there's DB owner, there's DB reader, there's DB viewer, which is very different from what's in a lake house, which is very different from the roles and access in a pipeline. So even if you're going the route of, well, we're not going to do the control plane level access, so to speak, the workspace level access. We're going to do the data plane access and just give it those roles out. Well, again, I need to have pretty intimate knowledge of the product that I'm giving them and those features, because again, you're really expanding here the warehouse, Synapse, data, the abilities with a notebook. Each of these come with their own bells and whistles because they existed beforehand, as we've said so many times. And I think maybe I'm not asking the question, but how aware or how familiar does the admin need to be on all of that? Because to your point, that's a ton of information to have in a head knowledge.
But to me, this is a lot of like, I like your point there, Tommy. And I would argue like, this is just, where's the classes, and maybe this is a need. This is probably a need, and chat, let me know if this is a need in what you feel like in your organization, right? If we're thinking about experiences like this, right? We should have real world examples of here's how to implement this kind of security. Here's how you do it. Here's the clicks. Here's how you get through this part. We're going to implement row level security in a workspace, and we're going to show you that the admin, member, and contributor all can see all the data, but the viewer cannot. Like, I think when people go through examples and do it once, they're like, oh, I see how this works. It's starting to formulate, like, it's this idea of like, I said this a couple times with, I think Seth, you and I have talked about this a number of times, like way back in the day when we were consulting together. There's this idea of you can know how the program works, but there's a point in time where you understand how the program works. And to me, there's a lot of these security pieces where I kind of know what's going on, but until I've gone through and actually built an example around, like, one of these good things I think is underutilized in organizations is this concept of domains, a domain role. So the domains allows you to think of like a collection of workspaces that are all related to finance. And so someone owns the finance department or the domain of finance. Therefore, you'd have someone in that space kind of handling and negotiating and doing some of the administration features for that domain. That may not be, it's not the tenant-wide administration, but it's something specific to that domain area. Like, who's in the domain, which workspaces should be participating there. If you're making 5 or 10 workspaces, that domain owner should be able to do that and build what they need for their department, domain, whatever you want to call it, their area.
I think what's interesting to me is, like, from an engineering level, I have no problem with any of control level, control flow. Like, enable my data engineers and BI devs to have access to everything because they at least know a bit about it.
Yeah.
But we're introducing business users to this, right? And it's kind of like we've talked about ad nauseum. Like, how do we train people? What are our expectations around, like, everybody, having access to all this stuff? So I guess that's my point. I know we're running up on time. The other interesting parts of this article that I just do want to call out, page 60. I think there's a very easy button of turn on recovery. So when we're talking about business continuity and disaster recovery, what I think that implies is taking all of your storage from locally redundant to geo-redundant. And in other services in today's world, that doubles your cost.
Yes.
So I don't know what that's going to do in terms of capacity, but be aware, right? Like that one. Yay, Power BI has always had BCDR, always, and it's called out in here. Like, hey, disaster recovery already baked into that part of the tool. So that's awesome. Page 43 recommends capacity for each workspace environment, which I thought was interesting.
That's true.
So maybe something we can talk about in the future. And then I guess the one question that is a question to you guys was,
I want to agree with that point there. Before you go to the next one, I do agree. I think there's, with Fabric, I think we get a lot, the capability of building more Fabric capacities for what you need, as opposed to having one big one that uses a lot of them, which I think that's what we've been traditionally trained on with the P SKUs.
We're dealing with 2 sentences here.
No, but then like on page 42, and I wanted to get your flavor of this. They recommend the personal workspace concept for development.
I mean,
I guess
I'm not opposed to if it's a solo for solo developers.
No,
if I'm solo, no, but like why do developers have their own local?
They do. I mean, that's what happens today in current Git, anyways.
And that's where I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense in certain scenarios. In others, I'd be like, well, why don't we just all build in the same workspace, the shared workspace, so that if somebody's having a problem or if somebody else needs to pick up on the project, they can, as opposed to something being a personal workspace. Those are
one of the things I would one of the things I will say is kind of missing from this paper, which I wish they'd have more of, is this concept of CI/CD. There's not much.
That's a really good point.
So that to me, there was something that was missing in the report, or missing in the main features here, is just that the continuous integration and continuous deployment. And this is, I think, a story that has been, in my opinion, it's a bit weak in the Power BI ecosystem. I've built dev, I have the things, and I now need to make a test and a production environment of them. Or even just, I'm building things in dev and I need to get something to production, dev prod. That could also be a thing. As I'm working with more organizations, this is a concept that I feel like many business members don't quite grasp. But there's a surprising lack of, how do we handle this? What are patterns in that? Maybe this is not security. Maybe this is just part of, like, security is its thing, and continuous integration deployment is something separate. But I do feel like there's a very heavily overlap of, what should the developer see? Who's the person pushing things through downstream environments? Where do we, in that scenario, where should we be deploying to? So if you look on the Microsoft Docs and Learn, they do have some general guidance around how they see this working. So I think it's out there. It's just not added to this white paper. So that would be another area I would say of investment that I think either leaders or Microsoft should make as well.
And I think that actually makes a lot of sense too, why we haven't seen normal Git integration. It's just only Azure DevOps. We haven't seen GitHub yet, because maybe they're not ready, because I imagine they're going to be
in preview.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. I'm just saying something.
Or whatever. Like everything. Copilot GitHub preview. Yeah.
That was article number 78. Didn't you find
that? Oh, yeah. That was the blog post, this 117th blog post of the week.
Yeah, exactly right.
I'll finish with my final thoughts. And
let's do some final thoughts here.
I'm going to take this from the perspective of, I'm not my tenant admin, because I'm probably not my IT admin of Office 365. The person who's going to be reading this the most, and I think, take upon yourself, if you are the Power BI person, or if you have a leading role in Power BI or organization, to really speak upon this. And I think the more you're aware of the restrictions, the features, and the abilities that you can give, I think the further you can go with Fabric in your organization. Because I'll go back to the very previous point that Seth even talked about with Copilot. Allowing extra information or allowing extra features without understanding what they can do can block a certain product coming for an organization once they realize there's too much. So going through this has actually been, honestly, I don't want to use the word exciting, but there's been a lot of uncovering here too on, okay, I see how Microsoft's wanting to frame this. Understanding the questions that you're going to get asked with an IT organization going, wait, everything's here now? Hold on, what does that mean? So I think from even if you're just the Power BI person, spend a weekend, spend a few hours, go through it, and there's
at least download the white paper, and if nothing else, download the white paper, or go point to a link where the white paper exists. Go put it in your community practice. Like, to me, this is something that you share with the community inside your organization. Say, look, this stuff exists. Here it is. Go point to it. And honestly, if you're building policies around how your company is using Power BI, you should be leveraging part of the white paper and saying, we're doing domains because of these reasons, and here's some supporting information that says, here's how we're going to use these. Or, hey, we're going to manage workspaces this way because of this security paper informs, I think, a good majority of your policies and how you want to build things in your organization. This is great. Anyways, really good topic. Good final thought. Seth, any final thoughts for you?
I think I shared them.
Okay.
I'm tempted to say if we get enough mailbag requests for me to read it, I would read it.
Oh man.
But I don't know if I want to do that.
You know what? We if nothing else, we should have you read it, Seth, and we should put it on Audible. Should put it on Audible.
I'll record it. I'll be the producer on that.
You guys gonna slice and dice it into the different chapters.
If you read it, I'll chapter
section. Yeah.
Oh man.
Maybe something I do.
That'd be hilarious. Actually, I would actually.
Today, reading
smooth
Microsoft Whitepaper.
Nothing better combination
for security. Just bleh.
That would be pretty funny. Awesome. With that being said, my final thought here is just it's a great read. If you are in any way administering your Power BI environment, please go read the paper. Go download it. There's a lot of great information there. And I love that it's all consolidated into one large white paper. It's all in one spot. That's great. Super easy to consume. It's searchable. You can search for text in it. It's a PDF. It's great. So I'd highly recommend it. There's probably more conversations you need to have internally to your organization about as you digest that paper, what you should be doing. In all things, though, everything you're learning from the white paper, all the security practices, I highly recommend you funnel these back down to your community of practice. Funnel these things down into policies your organization wants to use, because I think, in my opinion, there's just a large lack of policy and communication about what is good practices in Power BI to organizations. And this should be a fundamental starting point on how you start building some of that muscle memory and experience around what is security for Power BI and Fabric in your organization. With that, thank you very much for sleeping through our episode of the security white paper. There has been little to no chat in the chat window, which tells me, for example, everyone must put this on and be like, go for the walk around. No one has comments about security. They're like, yeah, sure, it's security. So we've had little to no conversation about it, which I knew was going to happen. I just wanted to point it out. Thought this was a good topic. If you hate this topic and other topics that we have at the Power BI Explicit Measures podcast, feel free to leave us a message at the mailbag. Tommy will tell you how to get that. But also, please bore your friends with our podcast as well by letting them know you also fell asleep to our podcast and that they may also need some sleeping medicine that is in the Explicit Measures podcast. With that, Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
Mike, that sounds like a threat. If you don't share, then we're going to talk more about security.
If you don't share this, we're going to talk about security every day.
We're going to go page by page.
You will have to listen to Seth read the entire security manual.
If you want to find non-security conversations, you can find us on Apple and Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. Do you have a question, an idea, or a topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode? Head over to powerbi.tips/podcast. Leave your name and a great question. Finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, and join the conversation on all of PowerBI.tips social media channels.
I'm telling you, man, every time you say the word "all," it feels like I'm in New York every single. You should lean into that. All you
talk amongst yourselves.
Excellent. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.